So I'll go through some of the tools that can be used for call data, which has different names, sometimes call data records, but yeah, from phone data. So here's a made up data set. And if I have a look here, I can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, around 6 locations on the map. But if I look at the browser, you can see there that there's 44 records. So what that shows is that there's obviously a lot of overlapping points because a phone can go off the same tower or cell, so they end up in the same position. So how you visualize that can be a bit of a tricky feat. So these are some tools to help with this. The first one is to draw the cell sectors. So in the data here, you generally get a date and time, a location, and a bearing, which might also be called an azimuth or a direction. So it's the direction that the cell is facing that the phone was connecting to, and that can help you work out maybe approximately where the phone was, at least help you work out a general direction where it was. So being able to draw those sectors can be handy. This tool can do that. So to run the cell sectors tool, just point to the right layer, select the column which has the bearing or azimuth or direction value. So that's in this one. So it's generally a number where 0 is true north, 90 is east, etc. You've got this option here to treat 0 as blank or missing. So sometimes software or data, if it might not have a direction. And so then if you see a value of 0, it's hard to know, does that mean true north, which it could be, or has it added a 0 because the column's storing a number, and so if it's blank it turns into a 0. So you've got the option there to ignore those ones. The cell width, sometimes some data will have a width for the beam that comes out. You can just go with the default there of 120 degrees, and also the distance that you want to show these wedges. So these wedges, or the bearings, don't show the actual coverage, they just indicate the direction. So you can show a distance. The default there is 1,000 meters or a kilometer. You might want to change that. If in your data you've got a value, so it might say, and this one has a distance of 5 kilometers, you can use one of those columns. But for now, if you just want to use the defaults, hit OK, and it will go through and draw those directional wedges for you. It automatically puts a bit of a transparency on it, so you can go in and change that if you want. The second thing is to show movement between those locations. Now this can be useful or it cannot be useful, and it depends on how your data. Generally, if your data's, if the handset, the phone was moving, which means that the data moves along, this can be useful. It'll show movement from one tower to the next. But if your handset is stationary, it will generally bounce off a lot of different towers, and you'll be left with these movement links. Probably look like a bit like dropped spaghetti on the map. It'll just be going everywhere. So if you do want to show those movements though, you click this one, select your layer. So it's created a new one called wedge for those directional ones. Make sure you're choosing your correct data there. Date column and time column are optional. You can choose them though, and that means that those date and times will come through to those the links, the lines, which then if you're creating an animation, those lines can pop up as well as you're doing the animation. It's up to you. Unique ID is just a way of saying it's going from this record to this record. What's its identifier? You can just use the row number. And you've got this one here, the distance tolerance. What that means is that sometimes these cell locations, they might be bunched around a single tower, for example, but they might be spaced out a few meters. So what this means is the default there, 30 meters, means if the next point is within 30 meters, don't draw that movement link. Only draw it if they move away from that. So it's just a minimum there to move. So if we hit OK to that, And so this is what you get. You get those lines here with the directional arrows showing you that. As I said, it's sometimes useful to show that movement. Sometimes it bounces back and forth and makes it not so easy to see, but it can be useful there. And the last one to show you is, I'll just turn off the length and the wedges. Often with these, people want them labeled. So they want to create a static map that shows the locations and the time labels when they were there. So because there's so many overlapping, this can be pretty hard to do. If I label this layer, so label with, let's say, even if I just do the time, okay, switch that on. Okay, so there's a single time value there, but remember that lots of them overlap. So if I start moving these out, so you can see that there's lots of records there. There was 2 there. Okay, this one, I start moving it out, and there's a lot overlapping here. So if you want to be able to see every single record, you're going to be here moving labels all day, and sometimes you just can't fit them in. There's just too many. So it can be difficult to show all this data on a single map, a static map, a PDF or a JPEG that can be included in a document. So there's a tool in HSGridder called Summarize Time Labels. So what this will do is, where there's subsequent or sequential records at a single location, so you might have 10 records in a row all at the one tower location, this will combine them into one as a range. So it will say from this time to this time, and then give you a count of how many records fall within that range. So it might say from 1 p.m. to 1:30, and there were 10 records. They have to be sequential though. If you move to another tower, it breaks that sequence, and then you'll end up with another label after that. So summarize time labels, choose your layer, there's the original data, date, time. Again, you've got a distance tolerance for how they will be clustered together. And you've got this option here of label with the times only. If you're doing times only, the data shouldn't span more than a single date. So if you're just looking at, say, 3 hours of data during the day, they've all got the same date. So it'll just simplify the labels a bit. If there's over 24 hours and they've got different dates, you'll have to make sure the date's in there as well. So I'll just leave it as that for now. And you'll see here, it's working out these labels for us. Right, so this point up here, it's telling me the first cluster was from 12:18 to 11:31, and there were 8 records there during that time. So didn't move to anywhere else, just that one spot. And instead of having 8 separate labels, it's put it down to 1. As well as that, for each different range, each sequential range, it's actually put them into a single label. So now all I have to do is move these around. So you saw how many labels I was trying to move around before. This is obviously much easier to just move those 6 labels now. So now all the times are there. They've been simplified into ranges, and each separate location just has one label that needs to be moved around.